My name is Sharon Scott. I'm 36 years old, and I specialize in tracking endangered species across Western America. My grandparents left me their small cabin bordering a national forest in Yellowstone, my sanctuary between research expeditions. After 6 months in Arizona documenting wolf migration patterns, I returned home to a family dinner where my brother Kyle smugly announced, "I sold your little house for $950,000. My family cheered, calling it my first smart decision. But if only they knew the property was federally protected land. Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because what happened next still shocks me when I think about it. I've been drawn to wild things since before I could tie my shoes. While other girls named their dolls and braided their hair, I lined shoeboxes with old dish towels and tucked in shivering creatures. A toad rescued from a window well, a robin with a bent wing, a garter snake I swore smiled when I warmed it in my palms. My mother would find me at breakfast with mud under my nails and twigs in my hair, and sigh the kind of sigh that means love and worry at the same time. At school, that habit made me strange. She was born with a compass, not a calculator, teacher liked to joke, tapping my forehead. Classmates laughed, and I pretended I did too, though I carried the line around like a pebble in my shoe. It rubbed, but it also gave me a rhythm. The first time I saw a peregrine falcon hunt, I was 12 and perched on a bleacher with a pair of plastic binoculars that fogged each time I breathed. A blur rose from the stadium lights, folded itself into an arrow, and struck a pigeon midair with a sound like someone clapped once, very hard. Feathers drifted. But I didn't feel horror. I felt awe, pure, shivering awe. I went home and copied everything the library encyclopedia said about falcons, then drew the bones of their wings over and over until my wrist ached. By high school, guidance counselors pressed brochures into my hands for business programs and practical majors. The pressure at home was gentler but constant. Come join the family in real life, where paychecks and promotions make time feel solid. I listened, nodded, and kept sneaking out at dawn with a thermos of coffee to sit on the edge of the reservoir and count the first gulls peeling off the water. The tally marks in my pocket notebook were a secret language that made more sense than the charts in my economics textbook. I chose the University of Colorado because the first time I set foot on campus, the wind smelled like sun-baked grass and the mountains stood up behind the buildings. I told my parents I'd be sensible, biology, pre-med, something with a clear ladder, but the first lecture I wandered into was Ornithology 201, and that was that. My family lived in Denver. Every detail of their lives seemed engineered to contradict mine. Where my days were ruled by weather and migration charts, theirs were measured in square footage and quarterly gains. When I drove in for visits, my dusty Subaru would nose into a driveway lined with gleaming SUVs and a pair of Mercedes that looked like they had never met a gravel road. I'd wipe trail dust from my boots on an embroidered mat that said welcome in gold thread and try not to drip camp stove coffee on my mother's marble foyer. Dad, Harold Scott, developer, in all caps, liked to stand at the picture window and gesture toward the city as if he'd paved it himself. He ran a construction company that specialized in shopping centers, carving big boxes out of vacant lots and ribbon-cutting them with giant scissors for the local news. At dinner, he spoke in acronyms, ROI, NOI, TIFs, while I reached for the salad and thought about acreage for mule deer winter range. He called my field seasons sabbaticals, a word that flattened the work until it sounded like a hobby. Mom, Diane, preferred charity committees. She had a calendar full of luncheons with names like Hearts of Denver and Crystal Ball for Children, a wardrobe arranged by event, and a rotating gallery of friends with perfect highlights. She insisted the family portrait over the fireplace include matching outfits and a professional blowout for me, even though I looked like a weather vane in silk. "You'd be so good with clients," she'd murmur, misting orchids. "You care about people." But I cared about kestrels and wetlands, while she meant country clubs and donor walls. My older sister Monica fit right into that script, a corporate lawyer with a strong voice. She carried a leather briefcase the color of espresso and wore heels that clicked like metronomes down courthouse halls. "Sharon," she'd say, in the tone she saved for opposing counsel, You could earn more in a month than you do in a year of fieldwork. She kept an extra blazer in her car for me, just in case, and forwarded job postings with subject lines like friendly reminder. When I told her I'd spent a week tracking a pair of golden eagles across a ridge, she nodded, then asked whether my retirement plan still involved buying a cabin with a moral victory. We were close enough to borrow each other's chargers, but not close enough to share a map. Then there was Kyle, the youngest. He was the heir apparent, the son who made Dad laugh and Mom glow at galas. He worked at the company, technically, but the job description shifted depending on who you asked. Business development, project liaison, brand. In practice, he toured sites in fitted polos, posted drone videos, and spent more money than his position plausibly paid. When he made mistakes, and he did, they softened into learning experiences. If a deadline slipped, a vendor was blamed. If a budget blew up, the architects hadn't understood the vision. He had a way of swaggering through a room that made people step aside. Family dinners in that house were a choreography I never fully learned. Mom set the table like a magazine spread. Dad carved tenderloins and narrated bids. Monica live-edited contracts in her head. Kyle arrived late, apologizing to no one, smelling like cedar cologne and new upholstery. I'd try to talk about a banding project, and someone would ask whether I'd finally considered an MBA. "You're so smart," Mom would press. Imagine that mind in the boardroom. Dad would propose naming rights for a nature center as if philanthropy could substitute for habitat. They had a favorite nickname for me that sounded affectionate until it didn't. Our romantic. The modifier shifted. Our romantic naturalist, our romantic failure, depending on the wine and the audience. They often asked when I'd stop camping and join the real world. Despite everything, I inherited the cabin in Yellowstone the summer after my grandmother died, a set of keys in a small envelope with my name written in her careful block letters. Everyone in my family called it that old shed. No shower, no proper kitchen, Mom sniffed, listing its flaws like she was reading a grocery receipt. Dad offered to take it off my hands and bundle it with a real property. Monica asked whether I planned to Airbnb it once I installed plumbing, and Kyle called it a raccoon palace. I nodded, smiled, let them talk. Then I drove north with a thermos, a patch kit, and a box of my grandmother's notebooks on the passenger seat. The cabin sits at the edge of a meadow, just beyond a ribbon of lodgepole pines. It's a square of weathered wood with a tin roof that chatters when the afternoon wind comes down from the ridge. A single room, a stone hearth, shelves my grandfather built when his knees still cooperated, a porch only wide enough for 2 folding chairs, and the white enamel mug with the blue ring I refuse to replace. In the mornings, elk graze so near the porch I can hear their teeth work the grass. In the evenings, I can rest my binoculars on the rail and count swifts sewing up the sky with their flight. To my family, the cabin looks like neglect. But to me, it is a place of power, which is not the same as comfort. The air there is thinner, the shadows sharper, my thoughts quieter. When I sleep in my bag by the hearth, I wake before the sun without an alarm. When I walk to the spring with a kettle, I think in the steady, useful verbs of a life that can be carried. Boil, mend, tally, listen. What none of them knew, what I did not tell them and do not intend to, was that 30 years ago my grandmother registered the land under a federal program. She was not a woman of slogans, but she was shrewd. She filled out forms no one asked her to fill, sat at the oak table with a pencil and a magnifying glass, and drove into town twice to ask the ranger the questions that mattered. The result: the parcel was granted the status of a permanently protected area. All building rights were transferred to the state, extinguished. And the plot was formally recognized as habitat for rare bird species, the kind of designation that turns a square of grass and timber into a promise that reaches beyond one lifetime. On paper, it reads like this: conservation easement, development rights severed, perpetuity clause, critical habitat. In practice, it means the cabin exists more like a vow than an asset. It cannot be sliced into lots or folded into a shopping center or expanded into a vacation palace with a kidney-shaped pool. It can be maintained as it is, repaired with care, used for research and education in cooperation with the proper agencies, but it cannot be sold as ordinary real estate. A deed, yes. A quick flip, no. My grandmother understood my family well enough to know this was the only way to keep the meadow from becoming a parking lot and a fountain. I learned all of this by reading her notebooks, which are less diaries than field ledgers with the occasional recipe tucked between entries. Saw one prairie falcon today near the outcrop, juvenile, wind strong from the west. Then a page later, spoke with Ranger Hollis about federal program. Must file before the 15th. Ask about species list. There are phone numbers, dates, names of people who no longer work for the agencies they served. And at the back, a single sentence in her schoolteacher script for Sharon, who sees. That's it. No speech about legacy. Just the fact of it and the work. Because of the designation, I've been cooperating quietly with the environmental services folks since I took possession of the keys. Not in a dramatic way. Mostly in emails full of attachments, surveys, nest records, vegetation plots, notes on invasive thistle, and the success rate of the volunteers who pull it. In spring, a biologist from the Park Service meets me at the trailhead with a clipboard and a smile that looks like mine. We hike in, confirm the boundaries, note any encroachments, and drink coffee on the porch while we trade stories about the first bird we ever banded. In summer, I host a graduate student for a week to map kestrel boxes. In fall, we check erosion control. Every contact, every report, ties the cabin more firmly to its purpose and further from the reach of people who see land as an empty stage for profit. So I nod at family dinners when someone calls it a shed. I shrug when asked whether I plan to fix it up. Spring sent me south like it always does. Arizona that year was heat and stone. I set up camp with 2 graduate assistants on a high mesa that looked down on a snaking river. Our days found a rhythm that only Fieldwork teaches. Wake in the pale gray, boil coffee that tastes faintly of dust, glass the cliff faces for movement before the thermals start to shimmer, scribble notes tight and tiny against the wind. We lived in tents for 4 months, canvas breathing at night, zippers rasping like insect wings until my skin wore the sun like another layer. My world shrank to a scope, a notebook, a kettle, and the first piercing kek that tells you a falcon mother wants you to know this is her heir. We were there to document nesting grounds, old sites we'd surveyed years prior, and a handful of candidate cliffs gleaned from reports by river guides and ranch hands. The work was part cartography, part patience. We'd hike to vantage points that left our calves singing, set up the tripod, and wait. You learn to read stillness differently out there. A shadow slides over rock with no bird in sight, and you know a stoop just happened. A scrap of feathers spirals up and then down, and you mark prey transfer without seeing the exchange. When we did catch them in the act, the peregrines split the sky like knives, and every other thought left me. Communication was a trickle. We had a satellite phone the size of a paperback that liked to refuse calls at the worst moment. On resupply days, we'd drive 2 hours of washboard road to a trading post that sold beef jerky, sunscreen, and postcards with faded sunsets. If I held my phone at the exact corner of the porch and didn't breathe, 1 bar of reception would wobble into existence long enough to download a few emails, then blink away. Messages from my parents stacked up like flyers taped to a light pole, brunch photos, gala reminders, a link to Kyle's latest drone video of a shopping center activation. I sent back quick replies, alive, busy, love you. The students took turns calling their boyfriends and girlfriends, pacing in the dust with tight voices, promising they would be home by July, that they were okay, that yes, they were eating vegetables when we found any. The desert kept its own archive of days. Wind etched the tent fly with grit. The inside of my coffee mug grew a ring I could date like a tree. Nights, we lay on our backs and tried to name satellites, which is to say we guessed and felt satisfied. I fell asleep thinking of the cabin, the way the roof chattered in Wyoming wind, and woke with Arizona light already burning my eyelids orange. By late July, we had mapped 12 active nests and 3 promising territories with pair activity, but no eggs. We logged prey remains, doves, starlings, the occasional bat, and sent preliminary data to the agency inbox when the satellite phone cooperated. My body had become a ledger of small injuries, a blister mummified in tape, a bruise shaped like the scope plate, a sunburned nose that peeled in neat, dishonest sheets. I was as happy as I know how to be, used up and steadied by purpose. When the students hugged me at the last trailhead and drove back towards cell service and showers, I sat in the dust with my pack and felt the blankness of transition open like a canyon. Then I brushed off my pants, folded the tripod, and pointed the Subaru toward Denver. The city hit me so heady, too overwhelming. The first thing my phone did at the edge of town was shiver itself silly as messages arrived in a torrent. The second thing was ring. Mom. Sweetheart. You're back. We're doing a little family dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just the 5 of us. 7 o'clock. I could hear clinking glass, her party voice already warmed up. I was too tired to interpret, too sundumb to ask questions. Okay, I said. I'll be there. I put on a clean shirt that still smelled like campfire and drove to my parents' house with the windows down, letting the good air take the edge off. Their foyer looked like it always does when a plan is underway. Flowers too formal for the table, a candle that smells like Italian citrus. Dad met me with a clap on the shoulder that almost read as affection, and there she is. Our explorer. Monica kissed the air near my cheek and asked if I'd brought photos. I opened my mouth to say yes, later, after food, but then Carl stepped into the room wearing a suit so new it still had the tailor's confidence in its seams, a glass of wine tilting in his hand like a prop. He let the silence stretch until it became a stage. Then, with a smirk that looked practiced in front of a mirror, he lifted his glass slightly, as if beginning a toast. While you were chasing your birds, he said, each word polished, I sold your shed. $950,000 in cash. You finally did something useful for the family. The room did something I've seen happen only once, when a peregrine hit prey and the cliff swallowed sound. Then applause rose, actual applause, sharp and glittering. Dad laughed the kind of laugh he brings to ribbon cuttings. Monica's eyebrows shot up and then down, the face she makes when a client settles out of court. Mom clasped her hands under her chin like a girl at a recital. Now you'll have money for a real life. Enough of being a perpetual student, she said, proud and relieved. I felt my face go still. My first instinct was absurdly practical, to ask for the contract, the address, the closing statement, the name of the title company, the wire details. My second was to correct his vocabulary, shed, cabin, and then I heard myself breathe in, hold, and let it go. I reached for the chair that has always been mine, the one with a tiny chip in the paint on the right arm, and sat. They kept clapping, because applause requires no thought, and it sounds good in rooms with high ceilings. Kyle took a little bow to nobody in particular, then launched into a monologue. How visionary the buyer was, a California investor with big plans. How Kyle had played hardball over coffee at the club. How cash is king, and this proved it. Dad interrupted to remind us he'd always said that parcel had untapped potential, that timing was everything, that opportunity knocks just once and smart people open the door. Mom chimed in with a to-do list for my new life, a condo closer to downtown, a car that didn't look like a park ranger's hand-me-down, a wardrobe that celebrates your figure. My insides tightened. I set my napkin in my lap, folded the edge once, then again, as if neatness could translate into control. When I finally looked at Kyle, I made my voice light, almost curious, like I was asking about a wine pairing and not the ground under my life. Who exactly did you sell it to? He grinned, relieved to be prompted for more of his own story. A California investor from Silicon Valley, he said, rolling the words like dice he was sure would come up sevens. He wants to tear down the barn and build a villa with a pool and a view of the mountains. He said money was no object. A barn. A villa. A pool. I felt something behind my ribs loosen, not from fear, but from the sudden clarity of a hawk's eye view. He had no idea where he'd just flown. My smile, small, involuntary, flashed and was gone. I smoothed the napkin again to hide it. Mom leaned forward, sparkling with relief. Isn't that wonderful, Sharon? A pool. Imagine holidays there. And you'll finally be able to buy a proper place in the city. We can help you pick furniture that isn't camping. I nodded, as if picturing myself selecting bar stools instead of picturing a habitat designation printed in black ink. What's his name? I asked, as mildly as I could. The investor. Kyle swirled his wine and gave me the look he gives a junior project manager. You don't know him, he said. Big guy. Real connections. He flies in and out. California money. Loves the mountains, hates the cold. He wants the architect from that glossy magazine you know, the one with all the glass. He winked at Dad. He wants to break ground before winter, so we fast-tracked the paperwork. Monica's lawyer brain couldn't resist twitching. What paperwork? She asked, because Monica can't let an undefined noun rest. What did you actually sign? Kyle waved a hand. A purchase agreement, obviously. Title company squared it. Not my first rodeo. Whose signatures are on it? I kept my tone gentle, not a challenge, a question you could answer without losing face. He tipped his chin at me, amused. Mine, he said. Family power of attorney stuff. Don't worry about it. It's done. Family power of attorney stuff, Monica repeated, her voice as flat as the surface of a legal pad. She turned to me. Did you give him a POA? I met her eyes. No. The table paused. Silverware stilled. Even the candle seemed to burn quieter. Then Dad cleared his throat. Details, he said briskly, as if paperwork were a minor nuisance. These things are flexible. Everyone understands the spirit of the deal. The point is, an offer like that doesn't linger. Kyle seized the moment. I took a sip of water to cover the way my mouth wanted to go dry with laughter. Seized the moment. Where does he plan to put the villa? I asked, and saw Dad's face brighten finally. Something practical, something from a daughter coming around. Kyle launched into the pitch again, more animated with each sentence. He'll tear down the barn, honestly. You'll thank him, and site the house along the meadow line. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Infinity pool that spills toward the pines. He'll bring in a chef's kitchen, heated driveway, the works. It'll be tasteful, he added, a concession tossed like a bone toward my scruples. He loves nature. He wants it to feel authentic. Sounds ambitious, I said, letting the word hang just heavy enough to be felt. I'm curious what the Park Service will think. Mom frowned, misunderstanding on purpose. The Park Service will be thrilled to have such a generous neighbor, she said. A villa like that brings visibility. People care when important people care. Monica looked at me sharper now. Sharon, she said, remind me, what's the status of that land again? Is it inside the park boundary or just near it? I kept my eyes on Kyle, because this was a conversation for him even if no one else could hear it. It's protected, I said, and then reclaimed the harmless tone. There are some restrictions. Restrictions. Dad repeated, as if I'd said mosquitoes. Every property has something. Setbacks, drainage, whatever. Good teams work around them. Kyle leaned across the table, eager to soothe me with confidence. Relax, he said. I took care of it. This guy doesn't hear no. If permits are needed, they'll happen. If a letter needs a signature, it'll get signed. This is the big leagues, sis. Not your little bird club. I smiled again, small and unkind, and felt a flicker of guilt for how satisfying that smile was. Sometimes the big leagues have umpires, I said softly. He laughed like I'd made a cute joke. The candle guttered, then steadied. Outside, somewhere, a sprinkler ticked in the dark like a metronome measuring our delusion. I let them talk themselves back into celebration, offering the occasional neutral syllable to keep the air from going stale. They poured more wine. Dad told the story of his first great deal for the 100th time. Mom asked me what color sofa I'd buy with my new life. Monica went quiet in the way she does when she is building a case in her head and doesn't yet know for whom. Kyle checked his reflection in a window and straightened his tie. I felt no rush to correct them. Facts would arrive on their own schedule, the way dawn does, inevitable and indifferent to anyone's preference. And for Kyle, the discovery would be more than inconvenient. He'd offered up federal property to a man who wanted to turn water and glass into a view that matched his feed. I lifted my glass, looked at my family, at my beautiful, foolish brother. My smile this time was real and so small they missed it. Shall we eat? I said. I'm starving. A week later, the first trucks ground up the dirt road like they owned it. I wasn't there. A ranger friend sent me a photo from his phone: orange vests, survey tripod, a white pickup with the logo of a regional builder, and a man in aviators pointing at my meadow. By noon, the photo messages turned into a call. You might want to know, my friend said, voice dry, your brother's buyer brought a small army. We brought the law. The National Park Service inspectors arrived in a government SUV. They stepped out with clipboards, GPS units, and that careful politeness federal officers wear when they already know the answer. The foreman waved his site plan like a flag. One inspector took it, read a line, and looked up at the tin roof of the cabin. The other walked straight to the property line and unrolled fresh placards from a tube. By the time the builders had finished their first argument about where to stack lumber, the signs were in the ground: protected area, no trespassing, federal habitat. Violators will be prosecuted. What is this? The foreman demanded, as if an answer might knock the letters off the metal. The inspector tapped the seal at the bottom of his notice. It's exactly what it says, he replied. Turn off your engines. Gather your crew. Call your office. Word traveled faster than any falcon I've ever watched. By late afternoon, my father's voice filled my voicemail with versions of small misunderstanding. Mom texted me a string of question marks and a photo of the sign, as if I'd never seen one. Kyle didn't call. He sent a screenshot of a message from the investor's assistant asking for immediate clarification regarding site access, followed by a flexed bicep emoji he must have sent by reflex, a parody of strength. The first rail crack appeared when the title company tried to confirm something routine and found everything about it wasn't. The cabin's parcel number lit up a chain of cross-references that led not to permits, but to the easement and the habitat determination. The title officer, not usually an emotional profession, left a message for my parents that contained 3 different kinds of emphasis. There is no transferable right to build, she said, careful, slow. There may be no transferable right to have sold anything at all. The buyer's lawyers arrived like weather, first a pressure drop, then a front. They began with polite emails requesting documents for our files. When those documents didn't exist, they escalated to letters with words like fraudulent, void, misrepresentation. The question that underlined them all came bluntly in a conference call I joined on mute while eating crackers over my sink. Why is the owner's signature fake? The stillness that followed was almost funny. Monica, who had been quiet at dinner a week earlier, stepped into the ring as a lawyer and not a sister. My client, she said, meaning me, which was the first time she'd said it aloud, did not execute any instrument conveying title or rights. Any signature presented as hers was forged. We are prepared to provide exemplars and a sworn declaration. Her voice snapped like a clean line. For the first time, I let myself breathe. The buyer's counsel, smooth and coastal, didn't waste time. Why are there no permits from federal authorities? He asked. Why were there no notifications of the parcel's status? Who represented the seller? It would have been easier if he'd shouted. He didn't. He let the questions stack in the room. Dad tried a charm offensive. There's been a misunderstanding about jurisdiction, he began. We've done countless projects with state and municipal agencies, I'm sure. The lawyer cut in. This is federal. We're not talking setbacks. We're talking prohibition. He pronounced it like a verdict. Meanwhile, at the meadow, the theater of consequences continued. A surveyor attempted to take a point inside the posted boundary and got a short tutorial from the inspector on the difference between private ambition and public law. A subcontractor unloaded rebar and loaded it back up in the same 10 minutes, cheeks red in the cold. The investor himself didn't come. His representative did, a man with a jacket that cost what my tent did and a gaze that skimmed surfaces like a drone. He filmed the signs, the cabin, the inspector's badges, his own shoes. Then he made his one mistake. He called a ranger buddy. The ranger, to his credit, merely pointed again at the statute number and said, Buddy is going to be the U.S. attorney if you cross that tape. The calls multiplied. The buyer's lawyers bombarded our family line. Why is the deed inconsistent? Why was the easement not disclosed? Why was there no notice of conservation status? Why are you offering us land you did not own to sell? Each Y came with attachments, screenshots, parcel maps, scanned copies of my grandmother's filings. At night, my parents' house turned into a crisis center. I know because Mom narrated it. We've got calls stacked for the morning, she told me. Harold's meeting with counsel. Kyle is handling the investor. It's fine. I heard ice clink, paper shuffle, denial creak under weight. Dad tried to talk to me about compromise, as if Habitat could split itself. Maybe there's a carve-out, he said. Partnership opportunities. We've done, he trailed off. Doing didn't count where the easement began. The investor's tone shifted from interest to irritation to threat. Instead of the expected golden project, one email began, "We are now facing the possibility of criminal exposure." He copied everyone, Kyle, my parents, Monica, me, people whose names meant subpoena. He was right to be afraid, even if he was late. Construction prohibited by law is the easy part. But wire transfers predicated on forgeries are the part that makes suits sweat. A second letter arrived from a U.S. attorney's office. It requested preservation of all communications, devices, and drafts related to the transaction. Monica sat on my parents' couch with her laptop and a face that had shed sister for litigator. "Do not delete anything," she said, and for once, everybody listened. I drove north the next morning. From the road, I watched the last builder truck reverse, the beeping weirdly gentle. The foreman shook his head, said something I couldn't hear, and climbed in. The inspector glanced at me and lifted a hand. We didn't need to talk. We had paperwork for that. Back in Denver, the buyer's questions pivoted to damages. We relied on representations made by your son. One letter to my father read, sparing him no dignity with titles. We acted in good faith. We will not absorb the consequences of your family's fraud. Fraud landed with a thud even in that house, where euphemism is an heirloom. Mom cried. Dad raged. Kyle disappeared for a day and returned with new sunglasses and the same old confidence, scuffed at the edges now. The investors' team began to CC federal addresses. The Park Service filed their incident reports. The title company filed theirs. Every agency that had a box for "describe irregularity" filled it. A rhythm emerged, morning emails from lawyers with timestamps that said coastal, afternoon voicemails from Denver counsel who sounded tired, evening texts from Mom asking me if Habitat could be reinterpreted. No, I wrote each time. On the 7th day after the trucks came, an agent called me directly to confirm what mattered and nothing else. "Miss Scott," he said, "can you verify you did not sign any document conveying your cabin or the surrounding parcel?" His voice was kind enough to be human. "I can," I said. I did not. He thanked me, told me someone would be in touch for a statement, and hung up. When I set my phone down, the house felt very quiet, the way cliffs do after a stoop. The Golden Project had become a problem set for prosecutors. The call came late at night, the hour when the city finally quiets and even the most restless neighbor dogs have given up their barking. My phone lit up with Kyle's name. I considered letting it ring into the dark, but something in my gut told me to answer. His voice was unsteady, pitched higher than usual, the bravado stripped bare. "Sharon, listen, it's all bureaucracy. Just red tape. You know how this works. Tell them you gave me power of attorney. Confirm I was acting on your behalf, and this whole thing goes away." I sat at my kitchen table, a cold mug of tea between my palms, and stared at the faint ring it had left on the wood. My brother, the golden child who had never heard the word no in a way that stuck, was finally colliding with something immovable. "You forged my signature," I said evenly, my voice low but firm. "You committed fraud. This is not a mistake, Kyle. It's a federal crime." For a moment, there was only silence on his end. Then came the rapid-fire excuses, each thinner than the last. "It's just paperwork. They don't care about this stuff in the long run. People do it all the time. You're overreacting. If you'd just back me up, nobody would get hurt." I let him talk, listening to the desperation hidden under his sales pitch tone. For years, that tone had won him applause at family dinners. But the law doesn't care about charm. "Kyle," I said finally, "you tried to sell land you didn't own. And not just any land. Federal land, protected habitat. They're not going to look the other way because you smiled and shook someone's hand. They'll prosecute. And you'll have to answer for what you did. He cursed under his breath, words muffled as if he'd turned his face away from the phone. You don't understand. If I go down, it drags the whole family with me. Dad's name is on everything. Mom knew about the investor dinners. Monica's already in the loop. If you don't help me, it all comes crashing down. The irony nearly made me laugh. Me, the outcast, the so-called romantic failure, living in tents, was suddenly holding the only card that mattered. I only told him the truth. The only one who dragged them into this is you. And the only one who can't talk his way out is also you. He hung up on me then, the click abrupt and final. 2 days later, the official call came. The number flashed unknown across my screen, but the voice on the other end was unmistakably federal, measured, polite. Miss Scott? This is Special Agent Davis with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're conducting an inquiry into a property transaction involving your name and a parcel of protected land. We'd like to schedule a time for you to come in and provide testimony. For a moment, my throat went dry. Even though I had done nothing wrong, the word FBI carries its own weight, heavy and cold. I gripped the edge of the counter until the laminate pressed a mark into my hand. Of course, I said. I'll cooperate fully. The agent confirmed a date, gave me the address of their Denver field office, and reminded me to bring any documents in my possession. His tone was calm, almost reassuring. Still, when the call ended, I stood in the kitchen feeling as if the floor had tilted. The news traveled quickly through the family grapevine. Mom called within an hour, her voice brittle but dressed in denial. Darling, this is just a misunderstanding. You'll clear it up, won't you? Say it was family paperwork, a small mistake, nothing intentional. You don't want to ruin Kyle's future over a technicality. Mom, I said, my patience stretched thin. This isn't a family squabble. This is federal. Kyle's the one who ruined his future. I'm not going to lie for him. She started crying then, the theatrical kind that blurred truth and performance. You've always been so stubborn. Always choosing principle over people. Don't you care what this will do to us? I wanted to say, yes, I care. But caring doesn't erase the law. Instead, I told her quietly, you'll be fine. But Kyle won't, unless he learns that actions have consequences. Dad didn't call me. He never does when things crack. He retreats into silence, into boardrooms and bourbon. Monica did, though. Her tone was different, tired, resigned. You're right, Sharon, she admitted. This isn't a mistake we can spin. It's fraud. And fraud against the federal government has teeth. Don't let them bully you into covering for him. Her support surprised me, though I kept my voice neutral. I wasn't planning to. When the day of my testimony came, I walked into the field office in downtown Denver wearing the same boots I used in the field. Practical, sturdy, unapologetic. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, the chairs lined up too neatly. An agent with a clipped haircut led me down a hall into a room with beige walls, a long table, and a small digital recorder at the center. State your name for the record, the agent said. I cleared my throat. Sharon Scott. And with that, the story that began with a cabin, a family dinner, and a careless smirk entered the official record of the United States government. After weeks of interviews, subpoenas, and the brittle politeness of conference calls, Kyle changed his plea. The morning he did it, the courtroom was hushed, fluorescent lights flattening everyone into the same pale shade. He stood in a navy suit that didn't quite fit anymore, eyes rimmed red, and said guilty in a voice that belonged to a boy who'd finally found the edge of the map. The words landed harder than I expected. The judge read the findings: fraudulent conveyance, forged signature, wire fraud tied to the attempted transfer, false statements to federal officers. For years in federal prison. A fine that would take him longer than that to crawl out from under. My mother gasped softly, a small clean sound, and then nothing else. My father stared straight ahead, as if the judge were another contractor who could be outlasted with a stern jaw. I watched Kyle's shoulders drop, then square, then drop again. For the first time in his life, there was no door he could charm through. After the sentencing, headlines did what headlines do. Developer's son pleads guilty in protected land scam. Family business rocked by fraud. Acquaintances who had treated Kyle like a celebrity at parties pretended not to see my parents at the grocery store. The calls shifted from threats to invoices. The investor, who had deployed lawyers like chess pieces across the board, now wanted compensation for the costs of due diligence, site mobilization, and reputational damage. The title company wanted its fees back with interest. The court wanted its pound of financial flesh. My parents' accountant, face strained of its usual golf course tan, spread printouts across their dining table and tapped columns with the blunt end of a pen. They sold 2 properties quickly, a half-lease strip center off the highway and a smaller office building Dad had always called the anchor. There was no triumphant ribbon cutting, just a quiet shuffle of signatures in a conference room. The proceeds disappeared into a hole labeled restitution and settlement. A 3rd sale followed, then a bridge loan, then a line of credit they once would have used for expansion, but now used to stay afloat. The house stayed for now because it was where Mom could still control the flowers and the table settings. But even there, I could feel the math breathing down the hall. Through all of it, Monica surprised me. She pivoted from her usual adversarial stance to something I had not seen: alignment. She took calls with me on speaker so I could hear every angle, every clause, every trap. She attended meetings with our parents and refused to let euphemisms sit unchallenged. When Dad tried to call it a misunderstanding, she put her hand flat on the table and said, in a voice that could have cut glass, "This is not a misunderstanding. It is deliberate fraud. And Sharon has nothing to do with it." The room went still each time she repeated that sentence, as if the words themselves hung in the air. Monica also handled the investors' team with the precision of a surgeon. She drew a line around me that even the most aggressive associate wouldn't cross. When they tried to suggest I had benefited from the attempted sale by virtue of familial relationship, she laid out the easement documents, protected status, extinguished development rights, critical habitat designation. The more she spoke, the more the investors' council redirected their fire, not at me, but at the place where it belonged. And then something I didn't anticipate happened. The investor himself, not a representative, asked to meet. He had been a name on letterhead and a bank account across a continent. Now he walked into a small conference room wearing a suit the color of rain and a face that had discovered humility the hard way. He asked to see the documents. He asked about the habitat designation. He asked quietly, without spin, what the land actually was. So I told him. He listened without interrupting, which impressed me more than his watch ever could have. When I finished, he sat back and exhaled through his nose. "I hire people to know things," he said finally. "They didn't know this. I didn't know this." His gaze was steady. "I threatened to sue everyone in sight. I thought I was the injured party. Maybe I was contractually. But I can see I was also wrong." Days later, he sent an email that made its way to every corner of my family inbox, a public statement withdrawing several legal claims against my parents, not the ones tied to clear fraud, those remained, and announcing that he had learned important facts about the ecological value of the land in question. And he went further. He asked if I would introduce him to the raptor rehabilitation group I sometimes volunteered with and the Park Service liaison who managed citizen science projects. If there's a way to do something right in relation to this mess, he wrote, I'd like to fund it. I didn't trust it at first. Money carries its own gravity, and I've seen too many checks come with strings braided out of ego. But meetings followed, and no strings appeared. He attended one release of a rehabilitated red-tailed hawk at a field just outside the city and stood with his hands in his pockets while the bird took the air like a second chance. Something in his face softened, or maybe I wanted to see softening and made it up. Either way, he pledged a substantial donation to programs for the conservation of birds of prey, split among the rehab center, a university research fund, and a grant for rural landowners to retrofit dangerous power poles. Meanwhile, the family recalibrated around absence and loss. Kyle called from a county facility on a tinny line that turned his voice into a version of itself. At first, he was angry at me, at Monica, at the system, then he became quiet. We didn't talk long. He told me the light in the yard was bad for stargazing, but good enough to tell time. We didn't say sorry. We didn't say much. Mom oscillated between shame and nostalgia, talking as if she could narrate us back to the version of our family. Dad stopped drinking bourbon at home and started walking at dawn. I ran into him once on the path near the reservoir, both of us pretending we were just two citizens exercising, both of us out of breath from more than the incline. Monica and I began texting about things that weren't cases. The new sandwich place she liked, the hiking trail I thought she might actually enjoy if she left her heels and her armor at home. She came with me one Saturday to a community talk about raptors. She sat in the back, jacket on her knees, and asked a question so precise even the scientist on stage blinked and grinned. On the way out, she said, almost to herself, "You're good at making the invisible visible." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to accept a compliment from someone I'd spent most of my life braced against. The investor's donation turned into a press release that drifted through local news. Tech investor funds raptor conservation after learning of protected land status. The comments under the article were their own ecosystem. Cynics, optimists, birders arguing about taxonomy, someone asking if kestrels could be trained to deliver engagement rings. I closed my laptop and drove north. At the fence, the signs still held. The meadow still held. Above the ridge, a dark shape tipped into a dive so fast it looked like falling until you recognized the control in it. A year is a different kind of season. By the time 12 months had rounded back to spring, the cabin had a new heartbeat. We didn't change its bones. We simply gave its purpose a door to walk through. I wrote a small grant with Monica's help, and the Park Service matched it with in-kind support. We added 2 sturdy work tables beneath the north window, a solar array no bigger than my grandmother's dining table, and a locked cabinet for scopes, data loggers, first aid, and field guides whose margins are already soft with use. The porch still sags in the corner that sags in every photograph since 1989. I keep promising it I'll learn carpentry. It answers with the creak I know by sound. Students come in 2s and 3s, backpacks dangling like shells, faces lit with the same anxious hunger I remember. They camp under the pines and rotate dish duty like a tiny nation with fair laws. In the mornings, we brew coffee in a dented percolator that hisses. In the evenings, we enter data under a string of solar lights that make the cabin look festive even when we're all bone-tired. They name the resident vole. They argue about all pellets. They learn the difference between a question worth asking and a question the meadow will not answer. We started with triage, pulling cheatgrass, reseeding thin places with native bunch grasses, staking erosion fabric along the scar where a truck tire had trespassed last year. The tools are humble: shovels, gloves, a 5-gallon bucket that used to hold drywall mud and now holds purpose. By July, green stitched the brown in neat, hopeful threads, and the first evening thunderstorms combed the meadow with rain. We set a motion camera at the game trail that skirts the spring. It caught elk at dawn, a fox at dusk, and once, the fanned face of a great horned owl on the ground, mantling a mouse like a secret. Some afternoons, when the heat presses everything flat, we sit in the thin shade of the porch and watch the hawks ride the thermals that rise off the slope. Letters from Kyle arrive every couple of weeks. They're smaller than our old fights and larger than the man who loved the word villa. He writes about a course in environmental law he signed up for, how at first he took it to pass time and then realized he wanted to pass something else. He admits for the first time, "I sold your house, but I didn't understand that it was priceless." My parents move in slower arcs now. The loss of properties was less a fall than a leveling. Dad still wears his watch, still checks the horizon. He asks about the students' projects and doesn't pivot to monetization. He and Mom established a small fund, modest, he says, and the word fits him better than his old superlatives, to support protected lands. The first grants went to 2 ranchers who wanted to retrofit power poles and to a school that needed binoculars for a migration club. On the anniversary of the day I first turned the research base key, I made coffee at dawn, sat on the porch rail with my feet on the step below, and watched a golden eagle drift the ridge like a question that already knows its answer. The meadow breathed. The swifts wrote their fast, beautiful nonsense in the margin of the sky. And I thought, as I have thought 100 times and will think 100 more, My brother sold my house while I was away, but he didn't know the most important thing. This house cannot simply be bought and sold. It belongs to nature forever. I belong to it only as long as I keep my promise. Have you ever had to defend your right to live the way you chose, especially against your own family? Have you been told your dreams were worthless, only to prove they carried more value than anyone guessed? Tell me your own story in the comments below. I want to hear it. And if you've watched this far, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because I have many more shocking stories where truth, in the end, proves stronger than lies.